Okay, so I feel like you shouldn't need more than 2 more minutes because you are supposed to use graphing technology. So, I mean, use it. You have 6 of them to do. I'm sure some of them you can do easily by hand, but yeah, use your graphing technology. We'll go over them shortly. Okay, so this warm up, and I walked around. I had people that were either completely done, hadn't started, or maybe started at least 2 of them. As great of a skill it is to be able to copy from Desmos, we don't want to spend too much time on it, okay? So I'm going to show you the answers, and then whatever ones you didn't get or whatever ones you made a mistake on, make sure you got that down. But granted, my coordinate planes don't necessarily look like your little sketch on your paper. Your little sketch on your paper, these tick marks are not labeled. So you probably want to label them to something that makes sense. So like, for example, the one that's y greater than x. Well, let me pick a different one. Let me pick one that has an interesting line. Like the -8, this one. It doesn't say what these are counting by. Maybe they're counting by 4s, and you want to make this one -8. All right, but whatever you're counting by, you probably want to show that on your coordinate plane. Not all of them are counting by 1s, for example. And then this one would be shaded below it with a dashed line. Okay, but here's my images of the key, and you can kind of construct it how you feel best for yours. Now with graphing technology, like Desmos, for example, it's very user-friendly. Normally, when we graph things by hand, what form do we want them to be in? And y equals mx plus b, where that y is isolated. With Desmos, for example, you don't have to put it in y equals mx plus b. You just type it exactly how it looks. And Desmos even has inequality buttons that are not hard to find. They're near your equal sign on Desmos. So that alone should be a good tool to use on your tests. But unless you really know what you're looking at, it might only narrow it down to a couple answers. Still better than nothing, right? Like, you could try your best to copy it from Desmos. But the key things that I look for when I grade your sketches are, do you have the right y-intercept? Do you have the correct slope? So this one, for example, what's my y-intercept? 0. And this one is in slope-intercept form because the y is isolated, but the reason why you don't see plus a number is because that number is 0. And what's the slope? It is positive, but what's the 1? The slope is 1. And if it's not written as a fraction, make it a fraction by writing it over 1. That you know you're going up 1 to the right one, up 1 to the right. Okay, so that's what we already did in the last unit. The new parts are now, you need to make sure for this first one, for example, that it's a dashed line. Where do I look in my inequality to tell me if it's solid or dashed? Table 6, can you tell me? Where in this tells me that it's going to be a dashed line? The symbol and the fact that it's missing a little line underneath, right? It's just greater than, not greater than or equal to. It doesn't have part of an equal sign, so a dashed line. So that, even if it's not in slope-intercept form, on your test, you might have the inequality and have to match it to the right graph, or you might have the graph and have to match to the right inequality. The solid versus dash You can tell even if it's not in slope-intercept form. Like this one down here. Not in slope-intercept form, but I know it should have a dashed line because the symbol doesn't have that little line underneath. So easy. That should narrow it down to usually 2 answers. So all the ones that I'm marking, make sure on your paper definitely have dashed lines, not solid. The other two should have solid because they have the little line. All right, the other thing all of your graphs should have are shading. So inequalities, shade. Table 7, can you tell me how I know which direction needs to be shaded? In general, for any inequality? The little line underneath. So that tells me if it's solid or dashed. What about the direction of shading? That's not necessarily the little line underneath. Which way the symbol is going in relation to what? You're right there. What else did I include with my rule about shading? So I want to say like you shade above when it's these symbols, because you could have an example like this bottom left one that we are shading above, but it's not those symbols. So what's important when you're looking at it? And it's all paying attention. So in all of these, we have this one, this one, this one, and this one all shading above. You could look at their signs. All of them face this way except for this one, but yet we're still shading this one above. Why? What else is important when we're looking at it? Ways. So when you are looking at it, you should definitely make sure it's in slope-intercept form. Because if it's not, then you can't really look at the way it's facing. Because yeah, sometimes the symbol does split. But class, is this one in slope-intercept form? It is, because the y is isolated. What's different with this one with the other ones that are in slope-intercept form? Did you say, Amy? It's not what? It is though. It's isolated. It's alone on one side. What's different with this one compared to the others that are in slope-intercept form? We're spending too long on this. And you guys are right there. Like what I'm getting you to notice is not complicated. Sometimes all we want you to notice in certain warm-ups is like, oh, all the numbers are positive or something like that. Like nothing crazy. What do we notice about this one? Negative x plus 8 less than or equal to y than the other ones. No, that's not one. There are others that have negative slopes. Right, but we are talking about this symbol. I don't want you putting that you shade above when it's this symbol, because we're shading above in this one and it's not that symbol. So what did I include when I showed you the rule for ways to shade above? Can we take out our notes maybe? Because this is taking way too long. If there wasn't fall break next week, then you would be giving your test like literally days. But there is fall break, so you're not taking it until after fall break. You need to have this all memorized by then. And it's not the first time we're talking. All you're making is memorize and it's a question. So for the millionth time now, we have rules for whether you shade above or below. Notice that, like a lot of teachers will tell you, you shade above if it's these symbols. But look at this one. Is that one of those symbols? So what does it matter? Umberland? But if I can shade above when it doesn't have a line under it, then that's not it, right? This one shades above and there's a little line under it. So we already established the little line being underneath only tells you if it's dashed or solid. That's it. So if you want to rewrite the rule from the dashed or solid, go ahead. It's dashed if it's this one or this one. It's solid if it's this one or this one. But not for shading. I can shade above when it has a line underneath or not. What do I look at to tell me if I shade above? Wait. So if I rearrange it with the Y on the other side, you could, and then now it's above, but it needs to be in relation to the Y, is what I was trying to get you all to say. So you see how the difference between all the ones that are shaded above, so everyone look at the screen again, this is shaded above, this is shaded above, and this one's shaded above. All of them have it facing this way, except this one. What's the only thing that's different with this one? The Y is on the other side. So what matters about it is where the opening is in relation to the Y, is what I was trying to get to. So maybe star, highlight that. It has to be where it is in relation to the Y. And it has to be when it's in slope-intercept form already. But this one probably wasn't a great one to talk about because it's not in slope-intercept form. But when I do put it in that form, I am not flipping the sign at all. So it's still Y greater than for all the ones that are shading above. Y is bigger in each situation. Does that make sense now? If I erase it and ask you again, are you gonna like just stare at me like, no? Okay. Well, you have to have it memorized by the time it's so. With quizzes, which we already took our quiz for this unit, you can look at the notes that say that. But by the unit test, you have to have these memorized. And I try to give you things that help you memorize it. Like the fact that this is half an equal sign, and with equation, we only did solid lines. I try to help you with that. For the shading, it has to be if I'm highlighting the Y values that are greater than the line or not. So you know how your coordinate plane is a number line? It's two number lines put together. Look at your Y-axis. If Y is greater in this situation, I'm shading the Y values that are greater. If Y is smaller in this situation, I'm shading the Y values that are smaller. Okay, that way you don't have to memorize or anything. Question? Okay, so that took a little bit longer than it needed to, but hopefully you got something from it, because Desmos is great, but it doesn't do everything for you. And if you only know how to copy from Desmos, I can kind of tell when I grade your test. It's like things like the slope will be correct, or the Y-intercept, and things like that. But the shading and the inequality symbols, like whether it's dashed or solid, that Desmos could help remind us. The problem though is if you don't know how to write an inequality from a situation, then how can you type it in the Desmos? So that's what we're going to be looking at today. So eyes up here, I feel like we're staring at our screen that we were not supposed to. we are going to focus on making the inequalities from situations. And then of course we can use graphic and identify solutions. But also interpreting the solutions is the other thing within the working. I record every day, just like I'm recording right now. The practice is lesson 23, so definitely use that as your feedback for how you're doing. See what you need to focus on and maybe ask questions on, or maybe more IXL on. That's usually a good indicator of how to do on a quiz or test. And your study guides are all available, including the IXL skills. I mean, I didn't put a little picture of the IXL skills, but they've been available the whole unit. Yeah, definitely use fall break to work on your study guide so that you don't forget everything, because you are being assessed on it. After fall break will be like the binder check and things. I'll let you ask me questions on the study guide, but that really only works when you have looked at it at least once. So there might be a couple things on the study guides that you don't know yet, but we only have 2 more lessons after today. So we're almost there. And a lot of it is repetitive from the first unit, so you might even be able to figure it out. That's all available to you at the top of Schoology. Your binder check is after break. So like I said, we're almost done. It's 2 more note pages after this. And yeah, you have your binder ready over break. Rewatch the lessons that you were absent for, or maybe you weren't paying attention there. I don't usually pass out the practice test too early, because if you're not going to work on it, then you don't need it. If you feel like you will actually work on it over break, then you're welcome to grab it from the bit. Otherwise, I'm giving it out on Monday. Find the check the phone. Okay. So lots of announcements. That's just about this class. Tomorrow, make sure you bring a charged Chromebook, or at the very least your charger, because you are doing your STAR testing. So that is something that you don't have to study for, but you also don't want to just treat like it doesn't matter, because I will talk to you if you're showing that you're not meeting certain grade level skills, and tell you like you need to work on these tonight stuff. Okay, so don't just like guess on all of it, because then it will say that you're at a really low grade level, and I'll have to get you working on a lot of skills. Additionally, the Aspire math test, which is our state testing, is a lot of middle school skills, you know. So that's why we do that. So take it seriously, bring a charged Chromebook. You don't need to study for it, just take it seriously when you do it. All right, other things, slightly unrelated to this class specifically. In summer of 2026, I am taking a group of students to the UK. So that's really exciting. If that sounds like any remotely interesting to you, granted it's over a year away, so like there's lots of like planning time and stuff, but there's also a lot of incentives if you decide to do it early. So that's why I'm telling you now. Later this month, I'm gonna have a Zoom meeting about it. So if this sounds remotely interesting to you or someone you know, then please scan it anyway. Maybe just like save it in your notes or something. But literally, it's a really great opportunity. And I'm taking students from other high schools too. Like it's a really like cool thing we get to experience. Yeah. All right, and there's like all sorts of other information about it. This would be my first time hosting one, but I'm teaming up with a teacher from below too. That's like very well acquainted in doing this stuff. He knows more about the incentives, and he's kind of like the salesperson. All you would have to do is get your parents to either attend the Zoom meeting or watch the Zoom recording. Okay, so please, even if you're like, my parents won't pay for it or whatever, you'd be surprised at what they actually will pay for. And granted, it's over a year away, so there's lots of time. But yeah, or if you want to get it from me later, you always can. I'm recording this right now. I am gonna put it in Parent Square. I just didn't want to put it in there yet, and your parents ask you about it and you not know. It's a full trip. It's not like a Shadow Ridge field trip per se. It's for students, but it's not like sponsored by Shadow Ridge. Some of like the history teachers go on one with their students. I'm taking anyone's with them. Just for like a UK trip. All right. So like Ireland, Scotland, London, Paris, other cities that I can't remember. Super cool opportunity. Not this summer, but next. All right. Other things. So we do have a new fire drill location. I know you probably will not remember your new fire drill locations for all your classes. I do plan to have them printed and posted around the room, but basically, when and if there's a fire drill, we go to the football field, but not very far. Okay, so should there be a fire drill, here's our building. We're at the 20-yard line, so not very far in on the home side. But if there's ever a fire drill, we put a little paper on the wall to remind yourself. If you get lost, that's why we have like really long fire drills. And if you get lost and you're like messing around, then you get. That's just not. Questions? Okay. So lots of announcements, I know, sorry. Lots of things to cover. But back to the lesson. So I mentioned that Desmos is great, but it's only great if they're giving you the inequality. Most of the time, in a lot of questions on your tests, how do you make the inequality by reading it, understanding what's going on, and picking like the symbol that fits best. So that's what you're gonna do. I feel like we'll only be able to get through the bank account situations today. So like probably number 1 and number 2. If we can get through the others, that'd be cool. But just the first 2 is probably what we'll do. What you will do, and you can talk about it in your groups, but you should probably try it yourself first, is you're going to write an inequality to describe the constraints. What's another word for constraints? Restrictions, things that are limiting in the situation. So use your critical thinking skills. What is a restriction that you're talking about? And you're gonna make an inequality to describe it. Yesterday we did an equation. Today we're doing an inequality, and there's 4 options for your symbols. You have to pick which one is best. If you use a variable, be able to tell me what the variable represents. You can use graphing technology to graph it and then sketch that graph. So the hard part is creating an inequality. Be able to tell me where the solution would be on your graph, and there's an extra question about each situation, so don't get confused. Like for this first one, it's this first paragraph that you'll make an inequality for, and this is just like an extra question. Don't confuse it. Okay, so make your inequality, use Desmos to graph it, sketch your graph, label your axes, and then answer the question. I believe we'll go over the first one in about 3 or 4 minutes. Try it yourself, talk about it in your group, solve the sign of reporter faster. Huh? Okay, so here's the situation. I didn't bother reading it because usually you have to read it to yourself a few times because you have to make sense of what's going on. You have to see the parts that you need in order to solve it, or in this case, write the inequality, and then see that it makes sense. 8 and 3. So table 8, you'll be telling me a constraint. So let me read it to the class for a second. A customer opens a checking account and a savings account at a bank. They will deposit a maximum of $600, some in the checking account and some in the savings account. They might not deposit all of it and keep some of the money as cash. So table 8, what's the constraint in this situation? The maximum of 600. How can I represent that as an inequality? Table 9, can you tell me? How do I represent a maximum of 600 as an inequality? Less than or equal to what? 600. And what should go on the other side? Okay, pause for a second. So maximum of 600 is what they can deposit in their two accounts. Can they deposit less than that?
Yes.
Yeah. So what is going over here is what they're actually depositing. I wouldn't write that down necessarily right now, but on this side is what they are actually depositing in their account, which it cannot exceed the $600. It can be less. Can it be exactly 600? That's why we have the equal to part. I never memorize like random phrases to symbols. I just think logically about it each time. We know that the opening, like an alligator mouth or whatever, wants to eat the bigger number. 600 has to be the bigger number of this equation. So it has to face that. It can be what they're actually depositing. It can be less than 600 because they said they might keep some as cash. So it can be less than it. It can't be exactly it. That's why we chose that symbol. Now we need the rest of the expression. So ignore this part. So that's why I felt like this part was confusing to people. This part is just an additional question. So like in our instructions, it said, answer the question about the situation. This is a little unrelated. Okay, just look at this first chunk. I need to write an expression for what they're actually depositing in their accounts. So table 1, do you have an expression to show what they're actually depositing in their accounts? So you don't have anything on the left of that sign?
600.
Less
than.
So, okay. Are you telling me this is what you have?
No, I only have one side.
Okay. We want to figure out this side of it. So reread it. You can read it to the class, you can read it to yourself, but I need like an expression. An expression could be numbers, variables, it could be both. It just depends what's going on. So read it, look for any other numbers or any other unknowns maybe that we might want to put as a variable. Wait a minute. Yeah, maybe read it to the class. That way they can kind of
A customer opens a checking account and a savings account at a bank. They will deposit a maximum of $600. Some in the checking account and some in the savings account. They might not deposit all of it and keep some of the money stacked.
Okay. So did they say like a certain number or anything that they're, are you guys listening? Did they say a certain number or anything that they are for sure putting in one of their accounts? So we don't know what they're putting in either. Right? How do we label unknowns in that? So do I want to just use one variable? Two? Two, because there's two different accounts. Great. So they're not putting it in the same account. I don't want to use just one variable. I want to use two different ones, maybe X and Y, because we're going to end up dropping it. So if you did S and C, that's fine. You can pick whatever variables you want, but then we need to assign it somewhere. Got to define it. What should go in between them? What math should we do with the X and the Y? Because combined, they cannot exceed the 600. Okay, class, questions on that? Does it make sense? So if it just said They're putting it in one account, and it might just be X less than or equal to 600, but no. We're not, we're putting it in two separate accounts and combined, added together cannot be greater than 600. What are we saying X is gonna be in this situation? Okay, I would agree. Whatever comes first tends to be like what I would label X as. And I wouldn't just put checking account, I would put deposited. Because on your constructed response test, you want to be specific. If on the last one you just said X was hats and Y was gloves, you didn't get full points. You had to tell me X was the price of the hats. Otherwise, like I can't just assume. You have to be explicit. So X will be the checking account deposited amount, essentially. And Y would be the amount deposited into the savings account. All right. If there was not this stipulation that they might keep some of the money as cash, then maybe I would do an equation instead of an inequality. But because of that stipulation, like there's way more combinations of X and Y that could make it work. So now we're gonna graph it. This I would still box up because this is what we wrote down from the real world situation. You could type that into Desmos and sketch the graph from there. But this one's also not bad to rearrange into slope intercept form. How would I put it in slope intercept form? Table 2, can you tell me? What would I need to do to make it slope intercept form? Isolate the Y by doing what? Good. So you could use graphing technology. This one's not too bad though to put in slope intercept form. All I have to do is subtract that to the side. And now I can graph this. Take note of what you labeled your variables for when you graph it. If X is supposed to be my amount deposited in the checking account, then put that on your X-axis. Amount deposited into checking. And then the Y-axis is going to be the amount deposited into the savings. So we should be writing, not saying. All right, now as far as graphing it, what's my y-intercept? So these are not labeled. Decide what would be a good way to label them, that it goes all the way up to 600. I wouldn't want each tick mark to be 1, because then I wouldn't show my y-intercept at all. So table 3, what do you suggest we label our tick marks? Okay. And that is totally up to you. So long as it includes your y-intercept, I think would be good. If you decided to count by 50s, that's probably what I would have done, but it really doesn't matter. So long as it includes your y-intercept. You might not have to label every single one, but I'm just going to label up to where it includes my y-intercept. And my y-intercept's at the 600. If I want to use my slope, table 3, can you tell me what the slope is? We have that the y-intercept is 600. What is my slope? Table 3, can you tell me what the slope is always in front of? Okay, yes. So what is the number in front of the X right now? What is that? A negative. Okay, great. So my slope is -1. And if it's not written as a fraction, make it a fraction by writing it over 1. Go ahead. Now, this only works nicely if my my x-axis is also going up by the same amount. So if this is going up by hundreds, I'm not going to want to switch this if I want to be able to go down 1 to the right one. So this would have to be also by 100s. Just so you know, sometimes we can't because the x and y intercepts are like way far apart. But if you want to be able to just go down 1 to the right one like that, they have to be counting by the same one. And you only need so much in order to draw a straight line. So once you do have enough, draw your straight line. And it should line up to where this is at the 600 too, just so you know. Because 3, 4, 5, 6. If the most that they can deposit is 600 total, they could deposit 0 into their checkings. And they could deposit 600 in their checking and 0 in their savings. So that makes sense. And it does happen to line up. Question, Cadence? Okay. So there's that, but we're not done because it's an inequality. I probably should have asked you before I drew my line, should it be solid or dashed? Solid, and where do I have to look for that information? The symbol. And that's the one where if it has a line underneath it. If it has half an equal sign, then it is half equation. So it should be solid. All right, but now you need to shade either above or below. So you could use what I told you earlier to know, or you could also think about it logically. If the max that they can deposit into both is 600, should I shade above or below? Table 4, can you tell me? If the max they could deposit into either is 600, should I shade above or below my line? So I could show that they can deposit 700. Below. Does that not make sense, class? If my maximum is 600, can I deposit more than 600? So then I shouldn't be shading these because these y values are greater than 600. I should shade the other direction because these y values. And that's where you look where it's opening in relation to the y. On a open. All right, so there's it shaded. That covers us making the inequality. That covers us graphing it. Now you need to be able to tell me a solution. That was the third thing on that list. Table 5, can you tell me at least one solution? There's lots. 400, 100. That would be here, and it's in the shaded area, right? So that is a solution. That would be 400 deposited into the checking, 100 deposited into the savings. Right? Okay. Table 6, can you tell me another solution? Sorry, one more time. 500, 100, which happens to fall on the solid line. Class, is it still a solution? Yes, only if it's on a solid line. If this was a dashed one, then it wouldn't. But that makes sense. That's 500 into checking, 100 into savings. That's not more than 600. This is our max. All right, one more situation. Sorry, that took a long time. Also, this question said, if the customer deposits 200 in their checking account, so let's answer that. What can you say about the money they deposit into their savings account? So their checking account is the X. 200 in their checkings. What's the most they could deposit in their savings? Could they deposit less?
Yeah.
So you could say 400 or less. Something about that. They can deposit $400 or less into their savings, because they can. Here's a 200, here's the maximum, and they can deposit anything underneath it. Let's go with that. All right, you have one more situation about the bank account, one more constraint. Today, we are not putting them together. We'll do that on Thursday and Friday, where we want you to meet both constraints at once. Today, these are just separate. So you can kind of ignore what went on in this one. Now read this constraint and make a graph for that. Okay, so remember, guys, that this question is kind of separate. Like, there was an additional question in each situation. You only really need the first part to identify your constraint and your inequality. So table 7, if the bank requires a minimum balance of $50 in the savings account, and it does not matter how much money is in the checking, how can I write that constraint? What is the opening facing? For the 50 or away from it? Okay. If the minimum is 50, can it be exactly 50? So class, do we like this symbol? Because this is saying like whatever goes here, and we can talk about what that is later, but like what is actually going in the savings account? We don't want it to be less than 50, right? Because then we're not meeting our minimum requirement. We'll get like a fee. So what should be the only change to this symbol? Put it the other way. What we want in our savings account, we want it to be greater than 50. That way we don't get any fees. And it can be exactly 50. Now, for the expression here, it's just what's going in our savings account. What letter did we use for that in the last one? For savings account? So let's use Y. If you did X, sure, fine. But like, just try to kind of keep it consistent. So when we get to systems, like it makes a little more sense. But since Y is what we are actually putting into our savings account, I'm going to use Y over X, which can affect your graph, but just so you know, this is a little bit more preferred. In this class, it kind of ran long, so I feel like we won't have the full experience of going over the graph, but you can type this into Desmos and see what it looks like. The y-intercept should be what? 50, solid or dashed. And there's no slope in this one. I have no rise. Should I shade above or below? Above. Because we want what's going into our savings account to be greater than our minimum requirement. And that's the gist. It doesn't really matter what's in the checkings account, but we could still label it down here. So our solution for what Y can be just has to be greater than 50. So above a 50 is where the Y values meet that requirement. Mhm. Yeah, no. Good question.